I didn't realize my life was about to split into a before and after until I saw my own name written in a stranger's handwriting. It was on a folded piece of paper, slid across a cafe table by a man I had never met before. He didn't smile. He didn't introduce himself. He just said, quietly, "You don't know me, but I think you deserve the truth." I almost laughed. That kind of sentence sounds dramatic when you hear in movies. In real life, it sounds awkward, suspicious, like the opening line of a scam. I pushed the paper back toward him and told him I wasn't interested. He didn't pull it away. Instead, he said my mother's maiden name, then my father's, then the street I grew up on. That was when my stomach dropped. We sat there in silence for a few seconds that felt much longer. The cafe noise faded into a low hum, like my brain was turning down the volume on the world so it could focus on the threat sitting across from me. I unfolded the paper. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't blackmail. It was a list. Dates. Locations. Names I recognized and names I didn't. Hospitals. Cities. A time period that overlapped with the first 5 years of my life. At the bottom, written carefully, was one sentence. "You are not supposed to exist." I looked up at him, my hands shaking now, and asked him who he was. He took a slow breath before answering, like he'd been waiting years to finally say this out loud. "My name doesn't matter," he said. "What matters is that your parents lied to you. And not just about one thing." I stood up immediately. I told him he was sick, that whatever this was, he needed to leave me alone. That's when he said something that made my legs feel weak. "They didn't lie to protect you," he said. "They lied to protect themselves." I don't remember sitting back down, but I did. I remember gripping my coffee cup so hard it burned my palm. I remember my heart pounding in my ears. And I remember the stranger leaning back and finally telling me why he'd found me. He used to work at a private records firm. The kind that handles sealed files, quiet settlements, things people pay a lot of money to keep buried. Years ago, he'd been assigned to digitize old archives from a closed medical facility. A facility that no longer officially existed. Most of the files were boring. Intake forms, redacted reports. But one folder stood out. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was empty. No name, no diagnosis. Just a patient ID number and a note that said, "Resolved privately." That ID number, he told me, matched the dates on the paper. And those dates matched my childhood. I asked him why he was telling me this now. He hesitated for the first time. "Because I saw your parents last month," he said. I felt cold all over. He told me they'd come to the firm asking questions, trying to confirm that certain records were permanently destroyed, offering money, not casually, desperately. That was when he remembered the empty folder. That was when he decided to look deeper. He didn't tell me everything that day. Not because he didn't know, but because he said once I knew the first truth, the rest would come whether I wanted it to or not. He was right. That night, I went to my parents' house unannounced. They were sitting on the couch watching television like nothing in the world was wrong. My mom smiled when she saw me. My dad asked if I wanted dinner. I asked them one question. "Why did you lie about where I was born?" The room changed instantly. Not confusion, not surprise, fear. My mother's smile disappeared so fast, it was like it had never been real. My father stood up, pacing, rubbing his hands together. They told me I was mistaken, that I must have misunderstood something, that records get mixed up all the time. I pulled out the paper. I watched my mother sit down slowly, like her knees gave out. I watched my father stop pacing. No one spoke for a long time. Then my mother started crying. Not gentle crying. Not regretful crying. Panic crying. She begged me not to ask questions. She said some things are better left buried. She said they did what they had to do. That was when I realized something terrible. Whatever the truth was, it wasn't an accident. And it wasn't small. I left without yelling. Without demanding answers. I went home and didn't sleep. Over the next week, I started noticing things I'd never questioned before. Why there were no photos of my mother pregnant with me. Why my birth certificate had been reissued when I was 4. Why extended family always spoke about my childhood in vague terms, like they were all following the same unspoken rule. I contacted the stranger again. This time, I asked him to tell me everything. He warned me once. Once you hear it, he said, you won't be able to unhear it. I told him to talk. He told me about an affair. Not the dramatic kind. Not passionate or romantic. The kind built on convenience and bad decisions. My father and another woman. A woman who didn't want a child. A woman who threatened to expose everything if my parents didn't fix the situation. He told me about money changing hands. About a clinic that specialized in quiet solutions. About a baby that was never supposed to leave that building. And about a choice my parents made that went wrong. I wasn't adopted. I was a mistake they failed to erase. And the only reason I was raised at all was because destroying the evidence became too risky. I sat there listening, numb, as he spoke. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt hollow, because every memory I had suddenly felt borrowed. Conditional, like my life existed not because I was wanted, but because I was inconvenient to get rid of. When he finished, I asked him the question I'd been afraid of since the beginning. Why tell me? He looked tired. Because people like you grow up thinking they owe their parents everything, he said. And I couldn't live with that. I went home and stared at my ceiling for hours. I thought about every time my parents reminded me how much they sacrificed. Every time they used guilt instead of love. Every time I felt like I was constantly proving I deserved to be there. It finally made sense. I didn't confront them again right away. I needed time, because the hardest part wasn't the lie. It was realizing my entire identity had been built on someone else's fear. And I hadn't even reached the worst part yet. That came later, when I learned what they were still hiding, and what they were willing to do to make sure I never found out. That's where this story truly begins. I thought the worst part would be knowing I was unwanted. I was wrong. The worst part was realizing they were still lying. For a few days after that conversation, I went quiet. I didn't call my parents. I didn't text them. I needed space to breathe, to let my thoughts settle, to convince myself that I was still real, even if the foundation of my life wasn't. They noticed immediately. My mom started calling every morning. My dad sent long messages that said a lot without saying anything at all. Things like, we love you. Families make mistakes. Don't let outsiders poison your mind. That last line stuck with me. Outsiders. That's when I understood something important. They weren't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of losing control of the story. So instead of confronting them, I did something I'd never done before. I started asking other people. An aunt I barely spoke to. A cousin who always seemed uncomfortable around me as a kid. An old family friend who used to babysit me. I didn't accuse. I didn't explain. I just asked simple questions. Do you remember anything strange about when I was little? Most people brushed it off. One person didn't. My aunt went silent for a long time before answering. Then she said, very carefully, your parents told us never to talk about that time. I asked her what that time meant. She sighed and said, I think you already know more than you're supposed to. That was confirmation enough. The more I pulled, the more threads unraveled. I learned that the clinic wasn't just shady, it was infamous. Shut down quietly. Records sealed after a lawsuit that never went to trial. People paid to forget it ever existed. I learned my parents weren't scared young adults making a bad choice. They were calculating. They had options. Adoption, relocation, honesty. They chose silence. But the most disturbing discovery came from a source I never expected. My mother's old friend. She agreed to meet me only after I promised not to record anything. We sat at her car, parked behind a grocery store like we were doing something illegal. Her hand shook as she spoke. She told me my mother hadn't just tried to hide me. She tried to replace me. There was another pregnancy, another attempt, another plan. That one didn't work. And when it failed, my parents doubled down on pretending I was the miracle child they always wanted. I drove home in silence that day. Every loving memory replayed itself differently now. Every hug felt rehearsed. Every compliment felt like damage control. I finally went back to my parents' house one last time. Not to yell, not to cry, to listen. I asked them one final question. What were you planning to do if I found out? My father couldn't answer. My mother did. She said, "We hoped you'd never need to." That was it. No apology. No accountability. Just hope that the lie would outlive them. I told them I needed distance. Real distance. Not a cooling off period. Not space to forgive. Time to decide who I was without their version of me. They begged. They cried. They reminded me of everything they'd done for me. For the first time in my life, it didn't work. Because love doesn't come with conditions. And family doesn't require silence to survive. I moved out of state a month later. Changed my number. Built a quieter life. A cleaner one. I still don't know if I'll ever fully forgive them. But I do know this. I wasn't supposed to exist. And yet, here I am. If you were in my place, would you walk away? Or try to rebuild something that was never honest to begin with? And if stories like this make you think, reflect, or see people differently, stay here with me and share your thoughts below. There are more truths waiting to be told. The night everything cracked open started with laughter. Real laughter, the kind that makes your chest feel warm and your shoulders relax without you noticing. We were sitting on the floor of my apartment, takeout containers everywhere, music low in the background. It felt safe, ordinary, like the kind of moment you assume you'll remember fondly years later. I had no idea it was the last honest moment I'd have for a very long time. It happened because of a phone, not a dramatic discovery. No secret message popping up while they were in the shower. No late-night call that rang too long. It was worse than that. They handed it to me. "Can you check something for me?" They said casually, already turning away. That's the part that still messes with my head. If you're hiding something, you don't do that. You don't act that relaxed. You don't trust someone so easily. So I didn't expect anything. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't suspicious. I was just scrolling to find the thing they asked for. Then I saw a name I didn't recognize. Not alarming on its own. We all have coworkers, old classmates, random contacts. What stopped me was the message preview. It wasn't explicit. It was familiar. The kind of inside joke that only exists when two people have history. I froze. I didn't open it right away. My brain tried to explain it away before my fingers could move. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe it was harmless. Maybe I was projecting. But once the thought enters your head, it doesn't leave quietly. So I opened it. The conversation wasn't sexual. That made it worse. It was intimate. Long paragraphs. Emotional check-ins. Shared frustrations. Reassurance. Comfort. The kind of conversation you're supposed to have with your partner. Except it wasn't with me. I scrolled further. Weeks. Months. I felt like I was reading a parallel version of our relationship, happening just out of sight. Every argument we'd had, they'd processed with this other person. Every doubt I'd shared, they'd softened somewhere else. I didn't feel angry at first. I felt stupid. Stupid for believing closeness was exclusive. Stupid for thinking honesty meant transparency. Stupid for not noticing the way they sometimes seemed emotionally full before I even walked into the room. I handed the phone back without saying anything. They looked at me, confused. "Did you find it?" I nodded. They smiled. That smile still haunts me. For the rest of the night, I didn't say a word about it. I laughed at the right times. I cleaned up the containers. I leaned into them on the couch. They didn't notice anything wrong. That hurt more than the messages. Over the next few days, I watched more closely. Patterns emerged that I couldn't unsee. The way they get quiet after certain notifications. The way they'd emotionally unload less with me, but still seemed lighter afterward. The way arguments between us never fully resolved, like the energy had already been redirected somewhere else. I told myself I needed proof before confronting them. Not because I didn't trust my instincts, but because I knew what would happen otherwise. They'd minimize it. They'd call me insecure. They'd say it didn't mean anything. So I waited. And in that waiting, something changed inside me. I stopped reaching first. I stopped fixing tension. I stopped performing emotional labor to keep things smooth. They noticed that. One night they asked, "Are you mad at me?" I looked at them and almost laughed. Mad wasn't a word. Disconnected was closer. But I said, "Why would I be? They hesitated, then said, "You just feel distant." I wanted to scream. Instead, I said nothing. The next discovery wasn't on their phone. It was in their stories. They talked about this other person the way they used to talk about me. Same phrases, same tone, same vulnerability. They were recreating intimacy while keeping me as the stable background. That's when I realized something important. This wasn't an accident. This was a choice. They had chosen to split their emotional life in two, keeping the benefits of a relationship with me while feeding their unmet needs somewhere safer, somewhere without accountability. I finally confronted them a week later. Not angrily, not dramatically. I just asked one question. Who is this person to you? The silence that followed told me everything. They tried to explain it away, said it started harmless, said they didn't mean for it to go so far, said they never physically crossed a line. I listened quietly. Then I asked another question. Why didn't you stop? They didn't have an answer. That's when I stood up and said something I never thought I'd say. I don't think you cheated on me with your body. I think you replaced me with your honesty. They cried. I didn't. That scared me more than anything. Because when the tears stop coming, it usually means you're already gone. That night, we didn't break up. Not officially. We went to bed on opposite sides, backs turned, pretending exhaustion was the reason. But something fundamental had ended. Trust doesn't shatter loudly. It erodes quietly until one day you realize you're standing on nothing. And that was only the beginning, because what I discovered next would make this emotional betrayal look small in comparison. That comes later. I didn't leave the next morning. That surprises people when I tell this story. They expect a clean break, some dramatic moment where I pack a bag and walk out with my dignity intact. Real life doesn't do clean breaks. Real life does something messy, quieter. I stayed because part of me still wanted answers. Not explanations. Answers. I want to know how deep it went, how long I'd been standing on a lie, and whether I was crazy for feeling like something fundamental had been stolen from me. We moved through the day like strangers sharing a house. They made coffee. I thanked them. The sound of the spoon against the mug felt too loud. Every small noise did. At one point, they reached for my hand without thinking. Muscle memory. I pulled away before I even processed it. The look on their face, confusion, hurt, guilt, told me they were finally realizing this wasn't something they could smooth over. That afternoon, I asked them to sit with me. Not to talk things out. Not to fix it. To tell the truth. All of it. No minimalising. No softening. No, it didn't mean anything. Just truth. They agreed. Too quickly. That should have been my first warning. What followed wasn't a confession. It was a negotiation. They told me how it started. How lonely they'd felt during a rough patch. How this other person just listened. How it felt easier to open up without the weight of expectations. They talked about their feelings like they were weather patterns. Something that happened to them, not something they chose to nurture. I interrupted them. Did you ever think about how this would affect me? They hesitated, then said, I didn't think you'd find out. That sentence landed harder than anything else. Not, I didn't think it would hurt you. Not, I didn't realize how wrong it was. Just, you weren't supposed to know. I felt something inside me finally go still. No more anger. No more confusion. Clarity. I asked to see the messages again. This time, they didn't hand over the phone easily. They hesitated, deleted something, then gave it to me. That was mistake number 2. Because when someone cleans up before showing you the truth, it tells you there's more they're afraid of you seeing. And there was. Not explicit photos, not plans to meet, but something worse. They had talked about me, about my flaws, my insecurities, my reactions. They had framed themselves as patient, understanding, long-suffering. I was the difficult one, the emotional one, the person who just didn't get them. Reading it felt like watching my character be rewritten by someone who benefited from the lie. That's when I noticed dates. The messages overlapped with moments I remembered clearly. Nights we'd argued, times I'd cried, days I thought we'd resolve things. While I was trying to rebuild closeness, they were outsourcing intimacy. That realization broke something open in me. I wasn't heartbroken. I was furious. But it wasn't loud fury. It was sharp, focused, almost calm. I handed the phone back and said, "I'm done trying to understand you." They panicked. Suddenly, there were tears. Promises. Apologies. Claims they'd cut the other person off. Swearing they'd do anything to fix this. Anything. I asked one final question. If I hadn't seen the messages, how long would this have continued? They didn't answer. That silence was my answer. I told them I needed space. Not a break. Space. They asked if that meant we were breaking up. I said, "I don't know yet." That was the truth. I moved into the spare room that night, and something strange happened over the next few days. I started sleeping better. Not perfectly, but deeper. Without the constant low-level anxiety I'd normalized. Without the sense that I was always slightly out of sync with my own relationship. I started noticing how much energy I'd been pouring into managing emotional tension that wasn't mine to fix. They try to be perfect. Too perfect. Cooking meals. Leaving notes. Checking in constantly. It felt performative. Like damage control. One evening, I came home late and found them sitting on the couch, phone face down, staring at nothing. They looked up and said, "I blocked them." I didn't feel relieved. I felt tired. Because blocking someone after you've been caught isn't sacrifice. It's consequence. I realized then that even if they did everything right from that point on, I would never feel safe again. Trust isn't rebuilt by removing the threat. It's rebuilt by knowing the threat wouldn't have existed in the first place. A week later, I made my decision. Not in a dramatic moment. In a quiet one. I was folding laundry, my laundry, and I realized I no longer pictured a future that included them. No curiosity, no fear, no longing, just absence. That's when I knew it was over. When I told them, they were devastated. They asked if we could try counseling, if we could slow down, if we could rebuild. I said something I didn't plan to say, but meant deeply. I don't want to rebuild something that required me to be less aware to survive. They cried. I hugged them. I meant it kindly, but I didn't stay. The aftermath was strange. Friends asked what happened. I kept it vague. I didn't want to be the villain in their story or the hero in mine. I just wanted peace. What surprised me most wasn't how much I missed them. It was how much I didn't miss the version of myself I'd been with them. The one who second-guessed instincts. The one who accepted half-connection as intimacy. The one who confused effort with love. Weeks later, I ran into them unexpectedly. They looked thinner, sadder. They told me they'd learn a lot. That losing me changed them. I believed them. And still, I didn't feel regret. Because growth that comes at the cost of someone else's emotional safety isn't something that obligates forgiveness or reunion. It just is. I walked away knowing something important. Emotional betrayal doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like comfort elsewhere. Sometimes it looks like honesty diverted. Sometimes it looks like someone choosing ease over integrity. And sometimes it teaches you the most valuable lesson of all. If someone needs another person to feel whole while they're with you, they were never truly with you to begin with. If you've ever been in a situation like this, where the lines felt blurry but the hurt felt real, I'm curious. Would you consider this betrayal or just emotional immaturity? And if stories like this resonate with you, staying around helps more than you know. The first sign wasn't the messages or the late nights or even the way she stopped asking how my day went. It was the silence after I told her something good had happened to me. I remember it clearly because I was still smiling when I said it. A promotion, finally. Months of grinding, late nights, saying no to weekends. I expected excitement, or at least a tired congratulations. Instead, she nodded once, said, "Nice," and went back to her phone. That silence stayed with me longer than it should have. At the time, I explained it away. Stress, work, life. That's what you do when you love someone. You build excuses so you don't have to build distance. We've been together almost 6 years. Long enough that people assumed we were solid. Long enough that friends stopped asking how we were doing and started asking when the wedding was. long enough that leaving felt like tearing down a house you've been slowly repairing for years. So I stayed. I adjusted. I shrank parts of myself without realizing it. What I didn't know was that while I was learning how to take up less space in my own relationship, she was learning how to live a second one. The second sign came quietly. She started guarding her phone, not dramatically. No sudden password changes or hiding it under pillows. Just subtle things. Turning the screen away, bringing it into the bathroom, smiling at notifications she didn't explain. When I asked who she was talking to, she said, just work stuff or group chat nonsense. I believed her, or maybe I needed to. Our lives were intertwined in ways that made doubt inconvenient. Shared rent, shared routines, shared plans that stretched years into the future. You don't interrogate someone when your entire life is built on the assumption they're telling the truth. The third sign came from someone else. An old friend ran into us at a bar one night. Someone I hadn't seen in years. After a few drinks, he leaned over and said, half joking, "Man, your girl's popular these days." I laughed it off, asked what he meant. He shrugged. Just see her around. Always with the same guy. Thought you knew. I didn't react. Didn't ask questions. Didn't confront her. I told myself it was nothing. People see things wrong. Friends exaggerate. Jealousy poisons perception. But something in my chest tightened and didn't loosen. That night, lying next to her, listening to her breathe, I realized something painful. I didn't feel secure. Not in a dramatic way. Just a low hum of unease, like a sound you only notice once the room goes quiet. Weeks passed. We argued more, but not about anything important. Dishes, schedules, done. The kind of arguments couples have when the real problem feels too big to name. One night, after a long fight that went nowhere, she said something that still echoes in my head. "You're always so sensitive. You read into everything." I apologized. That's what hurts the most when I think back. Not what she did, what I accepted. The moment everything cracked open didn't come from spying or snooping. It came from her mistake. She fell asleep on the couch with her phone unlocked. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just plugging it into the charger when a message popped up. A name I didn't recognize. A heart emoji. A sentence that didn't belong in someone else's relationship. "Wish you were here instead." I froze. Time does this strange thing in moments like that. It stretches, then snaps. I didn't scroll at first. I just stared, letting my brain catch up to what my eyes already knew. Then I scrolled, and scrolled, and scrolled. It wasn't just flirting. It was intimacy. Plans. Jokes that had history behind them. Complaints about me framed as bonding moments for them. She wasn't just cheating. She was living another life. One where I was the obstacle, the inconvenience, the person who wouldn't understand. I didn't wake her up. I sat there until morning, phone face down, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might break something. When she woke up, she smiled like nothing had happened. That smile ended everything. I asked her, calmly, who he was. She blinked. Once. Twice. Then she lied. Said it was a co-worker. Said it was harmless. Said I was blowing things out of proportion. I told her I'd seen the messages. The color drained from her face. What followed wasn't a confession. It was damage control. She minimized. She reframed. She cried only when she realized I wasn't backing down. It didn't mean anything, she said. It was just emotional, she said. I never meant to hurt you, she said. But she never said she stopped because it was wrong. Only that she got caught. I asked her how long it had been going on. She said a few months. The timestamp said longer. I asked her if she loved him. She said, I don't know. That was the moment something inside me went quiet. Because when someone doesn't know whether they love you or the person they're betraying you with, the answer is already there. I told her I needed time. She begged me not to leave. Promised therapy. Promised transparency. Promised anything. I moved into the guest room instead. The days that followed were surreal. We existed in the same space like ghosts. She tried to be perfect. Too perfect. Overcompensating in ways that felt hollow. Every kind gesture felt rehearsed. Every apology felt late. I started noticing things I'd ignored for years. How often my needs came second. How often I was the one apologizing. How often I'd mistaken familiarity for love. One night, she admitted something without realizing it. I was scared you'd leave if I told you how unhappy I was. I looked at her and said, "So instead, you gave yourself to someone else?" She didn't answer. That silence was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. I didn't scream. I didn't insult her. I didn't beg. I just stopped trying. And that scared her more than anger ever could. A week later, I packed a bag. Not everything, just enough. She stood in the doorway, crying, asking if this was really it. I told her I didn't know. That was the truth. Because endings aren't always decisive. Sometimes they unfold slowly, like realizing a wound won't heal the way you hoped. As I walked out, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because the pain was gone, but because the confusion was. For the first time in months, I wasn't questioning my instincts. I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't pretending. I was just honest with myself. And as the door closed behind me, I realized something I wish I'd understood earlier. The most painful betrayals aren't always loud. Sometimes they happen quietly, while you're still trying to believe the person you love is standing on the same side as you. This wasn't the end of the story, but it was the end of the lie I'd been living inside. When I left that apartment, I thought the hardest part was over. I was wrong. The first few days felt unreal, like my brain had wrapped everything in bubble wrap to keep me from feeling all at once. I stayed at a friend's place, slept on a couch that smelled like laundry detergent and old coffee, and told myself this was temporary. Just space. Just time to think. But space has a way of getting loud. At night, when the distractions died down, everything I'd avoided came rushing back. The conversations I replayed in my head weren't the fights. They were the normal moments. The jokes. The routines. The inside references that now belong to a life I didn't live in anymore. I kept checking my phone, even though I told myself I wouldn't. She texted constantly at first. Long messages. Apologies stacked on apologies. Promises layered so thick they collapsed under their own weight. She said she'd cut him off. Said she'd blocked him everywhere. Said she finally realized what she was about to lose. Part of me wanted to believe her. That's the cruel thing about love. Even when it's wounded, it still reaches. But another part of me noticed something important. Every message was about her fear, her regret, her pain. Very little was about what she'd actually done to me. On the fourth night, she sent a voice note. Her voice cracked. She cried. She said she couldn't sleep without me there, that the apartment felt empty, that she didn't know who she was without us. I listened to it twice. Then I realized something that hit harder than any insult could have. She missed the stability, not the trust. She missed the life, not the damage. That realization hurt more than finding the messages ever did. A week passed. I went back to the apartment to pick up more things. We agreed on time, so we wouldn't run into each other, but she was there anyway, sitting on the couch, eyes red, acting like a wounded animal bracing for abandonment. Seeing her didn't make me angry. It made me tired. She asked if we could talk. I said yes, because part of me needed closure I hadn't earned yet. She told me a version of the story that painted her as lost, confused, emotionally neglected. She said she felt invisible, that she didn't know how to tell me she was unhappy, that he made her feel seen. I listened, and then I asked her something simple. Why didn't you leave me before starting something else? She froze. Then she said the most honest thing she'd said in months. Because I didn't want to lose you. I nodded, and for the first time, I didn't soften the truth to protect her feelings. You already did, I said. That was the moment she understood this wasn't a negotiation. She asked if there was any chance we could fix things. I told her I didn't know if I could ever unsee what I'd seen, unfeel what I'd felt, unlearn the way my trust had collapsed in on itself. She cried harder. I felt nothing, and that scared me more than heartbreak ever had. Because when the anger fades and the sadness dulls, and all that's left is clarity, there's no going back. The next few weeks were brutal in quiet ways. Friends took sides without meaning to. Some said people make mistakes. Others said I was being too calm about it. A few told me I was strong. I didn't feel strong. I felt hollow. I started questioning everything. Had I missed signs earlier? Had I been selfish? Had I become complacent? Was this somehow my fault? Those questions kept me awake at night. Then one afternoon, I ran into someone who changed the trajectory of my thinking completely. Her name was Lena, a coworker I barely spoke to beyond polite small talk. We ended up sitting together during a training session. At some point, she asked how I was doing. I gave the usual answer. Fine. She didn't accept it. She looked at me and said, "You don't look fine." Something about the way she said it, calm, not invasive, broke something open. I told her the truth. Not details, just that my long-term relationship had ended because of betrayal. She didn't gasp, didn't judge, didn't offer cliches. She just said, "That kind of break hurts in layers. Be patient with yourself." No one had said that to me yet. Layers. That word stayed with me. Because she was right. Some days I felt okay. Other days, a song, a smell, a stupid memory would knock the wind out of me. And slowly, I started noticing something else. I was breathing easier. Not emotionally, physically. I wasn't walking on eggshells anymore. I wasn't second-guessing my tone, my reactions, my needs. I wasn't trying to earn affection through understanding. The more distance I had, the more I saw the relationship clearly. How often I'd swallowed discomfort to keep peace. How often I'd been told I was too much for wanting honesty. How often I'd ignored my instincts because loving her felt easier than trusting myself. One night, about a month after I left, she called me. Not texted, called. I almost didn't answer, but I did. Her voice sounded different, less frantic, more resigned. She told me she'd started therapy, that she realized she had issues with validation and conflict avoidance, that she understood now how deeply she'd hurt me. I listened quietly. Then she said something that finally closed the door for me. "I don't expect you to come back. I just want you to know I finally see what I did." I believed her, and that's what made it easier to let go. Because forgiveness doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes it just means release. I told her I hoped she figured herself out, that I wasn't angry anymore, that I needed to keep moving forward. She asked if I'd ever loved her. I said yes. She asked if I still did. I paused. Then I said, "I loved who I thought we were." That was the truth. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time. Not crying, not numb, just still. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I felt grounded. The healing didn't happen all at once. It happened in small moments. Cooking for myself without rushing. Sleeping without anxiety. Laughing without guilt. Realizing I didn't need to check my phone anymore. I started trusting my instincts again. I started trusting silence again. I started trusting myself. Months later, I ran into her by accident. She looked healthier, calmer, different. So did I. We exchanged polite words. No tensión, no longing. Just two people who'd shared something meaningful and then let it end. As I walked away, I realized something that changed how I see relationships forever. Betrayal doesn't always destroy you. Sometimes it strips away the illusions you were too afraid to challenge. And what's left isn't weakness. It's clarity. If you've ever been in a relationship where you doubted your reality, questioned your worth, or ignored your gut because love felt easier than truth, I want to know what you would have done in my place. Would you have stayed and tried to rebuild, or walked away when trust broke? Tell me what you think. And if stories like this make you reflect on your own experiences, stick around. There are more coming, and you might see parts of yourself in them too.